That's the beautiful thing that so many students today really push for is they're not going to do something just because you tell them to. They want to know the why behind it. And we too oftentimes have glossed over the why, right? We just did it because we were told to do it and just expected that the people telling us to do it were the people that knew. And that's a beautiful thing that we are seeing from students that are growing up in the era that we are in, because when they ask why, and also when we ask why now, we are forced to have an answer and to make sure that answer makes sense and is representative of people and histories and desires of where people are at and where they want to go. It's an incredibly powerful thing that we're seeing. Welcome to the Choir Baton, a podcast designed to engage with people and stories, ideas, and inspirations stemming from choir. No other art form, no sport, no hobby, no business requires a group of people to execute a communal goal with just their voices. Join me, your host, Beth Philemon, as I interview guests who are singers, teacher conductors, instrumentalists, and community members. Together, we'll ask questions, seek understanding, and share insight from our experiences in life and in choir. Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 65 of the Choir Baton podcast. My name is Beth, and I am so excited to tell you about the Choir Baton teaching membership. I'm going to share with you the origins of it, what it encompasses or outlines, and also how it's evolved in the past year since I released it. So I am really excited for you to listen, and even if you're not interested in becoming a CBTM member, or the Choir Baton teaching membership member, and that makes sense, you still are going to get a ton from this episode because I'm going to walk you through a little bit of my history of teaching and key things that I learned, problems that I noticed, and ways that I tried to solve them both in the moment when I was teaching and how I am seeking to solve them within the teaching membership itself. And you're also going to learn another methodology and process, scope and sequence, if you will, of how I approach teaching choral music within a school classroom. So let's dive on in. I founded the Choir Baton teaching membership a year ago, and if I'm going to be honest, I think there was this seed inside of me that when I started Choir Baton as an Instagram project 3 or 4 years ago now at this point, that I knew this would at some point come to fruition. But if we're being fully honest and transparent, I was always a little nervous or scared, daunted by the concept and process. So I have always loved choir, always loved music, and it's always come very naturally to me. When I was in kindergarten, I went to a very small private school in Southwest Georgia, and we were fortunate enough to have a music teacher, Miss Pierce, who would pull us out of kindergarten, and we would get to have a 30-minute lesson during the school week. Like, I just had to walk across the way to the room where I would do piano, and she would use that red felt pen and write count in a slant on the top left-hand corner of every single piece of music, and the 1 and 2 ands and things like that. I quite frankly don't remember a period in my life when I didn't understand what a quarter note was and when I didn't understand pitch matching and things like that. It was just something that was innate in me. My entire family is also very musical. My paternal grandfather was a band teacher and later went on to be a principal, and throughout all of that was a church music minister in Florida. My grandparents on the other side have always loved singing. My grandmother on my dad's side played the piano. That grandfather was also in a gospel quartet. Both my parents play the piano on some like level or regard. My mom, especially the piano. My dad played the organ and the guitar. I just don't remember a time period in my life that making music wasn't together. And because I grew up also in very small churches, the opportunity to sing and be present was a huge thing. Growing up, I still was involved in music when we moved, went to bigger churches, and still joined high school choir with some trepidation because I'd never had formal music training within a choral setting. I'd been in church choirs before, but felt very different and very nerve-wracking to me to join choir. Was determined I was not going to be a music teacher because I wanted to make money, and I knew music teachers didn't make money. Went to college to be in music business, did a year of that, was like, I hate this. I miss actually making music, changed back to music ed, finished my music ed degree, and then I went and started teaching in Nashville at a small K through 12 public school just north of Nashville in Sumner County. And this school, I didn't realize how lucky I was being there when I was there for a first teaching experience. I would oftentimes have fellow teachers say, you never want to teach anywhere else. This is the best school ever. And I never quite frankly understood. I have since taught at 3 other schools in addition to that one and understand entirely what they are saying, but I'm also so grateful I've had those other schools to have that teaching experience at as well. And the reason why they were saying that is because the students there were highly motivated, labeled highly intelligent. I say labeled highly intelligent. They were highly intelligent, but they were also labeled highly intelligent because you had to have a certain grade cutoff score to even get into the school. And there was no public transportation to the school. Every student that attended had to arrange their own or had a parent or guardian that brought them to the school. They also had to be in uniforms. And there was just a lot of privileges that afforded students the opportunity to attend this school that I didn't, quite frankly, realize when I was a teacher there. One of the biggest benefits to being at this school was that it was K-12. So I taught 6th through 12th grade, and there was an elementary music teacher as well. And my classroom sat right between the elementary school and the upper school. In fact, I was closer to the elementary school than I was to the upper school. Quite frankly, my classroom should have been the elementary music classroom, but there wasn't one for me to teach in the upper school area. So hence why and where that location is at. Now, the biggest gift was being able to teach a span of students from 6th through 12th grade, but the fact that I had an amazing elementary music school teacher colleague literally steps away from my door. And she wasn't just any ordinary elementary music teacher. She was a specialist in every sense of the word. Val had an undergraduate degree in piano performance and music education and a master's degree in choral conducting from the Hart School. I didn't even realize then how amazing she truly was. I knew she was amazing, but since then have appreciated her all the more and even more. And aside from the fact that she was an incredible musician, she's also the accompanist for all of our concerts, and she just knew everything. She was also a huge encouragement to me. And as a new teacher, having someone in the building with me, even though she was only there part-time, speaking words of affirmation and encouragement and guiding and also understanding and really knowing my craft, that what I was trying to build was such an amazing experience that I have missed every day since I have not had the opportunity to work hand in hand with her. She was a co-teacher in every sense of the word, not just in the fact that she was our accompanist, not just in the fact that she would come into the room and work with the kids and give me feedback and things to work on, but also celebrate things that was going well with the students. But she also had been these kids' teachers, most of them since kindergarten. These students, unbeknownst to me, came with such a deep level of musicianship. I knew they had a deep level of musicianship coming from her, but I didn't quite realize how deep a level of musicianship they had because of her until later. I didn't have to teach or think too hard about teaching simple music reading concepts. Now, the majority of my students didn't have formal sight reading skills like a lot of other schools did, but they had that underpinning of growth and learning and expectations from her that then when they got to that middle school level where they should be doing that, right? Like the level with which we were sight reading and reading music in middle school was still elevated, but also a little different out of the context of her general music class, but still very connected. When we got to that point, it was easy. In fact, at times, the middle schoolers coming directly from her that I was teaching were sight reading just as well as the high schoolers that had had several years of gap in between her instruction and where they were at in the high school based on the previous teaching that they'd had before, which that teacher was very good. But we just had different approaches and to the music literacy concept, and her approach was different from Valerie's and mine in regards to how and why we taught music literacy. And Valerie and I were much more aligned in that. Again, these students were also incredibly intelligent. And I'm not saying that students that weren't there weren't incredibly intelligent, but these were students that were used to testing in high stakes environments that quickly knew how to study and understand information. Their reading was really good. Their understanding of simple math required to really exceed musical expectations at a beginning level was also incredibly high. And again, I'm saying that, not saying that other students can't be there as well, but we all know if you have taught in a school setting in particular, but really anywhere in anything, there's always going to be discrepancies within students' learning based on a myriad of factors. And in this instance, a lot of the outlying factors of how and why students learned at a certain pace or not were taken out from this equation. Most students at this school did not struggle with a lot of the other factors that students in other schools struggle with because they had certain basic needs taken care of. That's not to say these students didn't struggle. That's not to say these students were perfect. They were not. But what that setting afforded me was almost like an extra confidence boost about like how great of a music educator I was, even though it was hard because we were reading hard music. What I didn't fully comprehend was that while yes, I'm not selling myself short. I was a really good teacher. I also had students that came from a really good base that only heightened my ability to teach and find success with those students because of the fact that I had a co-teacher both in the time in which students had had before me, but also working right alongside me in the classroom as well. And that was invaluable. I left that position, however, because it was an academic magnet school, and the majority of those students were coming from high-pressure home environments that encouraged them to pursue careers not in the arts. And because of that, I had in my brain to build a successful choir program was built on numbers, and I wanted the big choir program. I'm using air quotes if you are listening to this, because for me, that is also how I define success in addition to ratings, were number of students. And at that school, having large choirs was something that was never going to happen because their best students that were strongest in sight reading and such were also strongest in math and languages and English and had parents that wanted them to be doctors, or they felt like they wanted to be lawyers, or so on and so forth. And the way the schedule was set up did not really afford music to have many opportunities to see kind of continued growth. So I left that school and decided to go and pursue a master's in choral conducting, which again was like another shot in the arm because I was fortunate enough to attend Northern Arizona University, which is a fabulous school, fabulous choral program in Flagstaff, Arizona, where I was able to make music at a really high level. When I graduated, my lecture recital was on Iachimo Carissimi's Jonas, and I had an instrumental consort with the choir, featured soloists, small groups, and the full choir, double choir at times, performance of his oratorio in which I discussed the importance of musical rhetoric in oratorios like Jonas. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. If you ever get a chance, listen to the last double choir portion of it. It's amazing. It'll change your life. But again, looking at rhetorical structures that were used in musical writing of that period in which to persuade a listener about the story is a bit of a higher order level of thinking and quite different in the music that I was making then to what I then moved back home to Raleigh, North Carolina to teach at. And Raleigh has a great tradition of choral music, as does North Carolina. I moved back here, not with a job, but to be close to my family. I had lived away from them for many years and felt the need to live closer to them. Moved back to North Carolina. And the irony being there were really no secondary music positions in Wake County, the biggest county here, and quite frankly in some of the other surrounding counties. I interviewed for one middle school position and I didn't interview well, and I just didn't feel right about it too. So it was a mix on that front. And then I found out there was one other middle school position opening, and I knew a couple people, got connected, went in and basically got the job on the spot. And the job that I was taking was rebuilding a choral music program at a school that had not had music in about a year to a year and a half. There was new administration at the school. And the story was everyone really wanted to have choral music back. And I had maybe a week to prepare the classroom. They were on a modified schedule and they were starting super soon. I took it, I jumped at it, and I inherited a beautiful, massive room that had been a storage area for that year and a half. My entire family came in, and within a matter of a couple of days, we had scrubbed every inch of it, taken every instrument out of all of the cabinets, everything, cleaned it, organized. It was a brand new space. I cannot express to you the train wreck it was when we walked in versus what it was when I walked out, and was so excited to change the lives of students through choral music. Was also excited to be back in a middle school. I'd wanted a high school, right? But had previously taught middle school at the last place that I'd been at, and knew that teaching middle school is an amazing opportunity to understand how your students are entering in a high school setting as well before you get there, and was confident that this would give me an amazing opportunity to only grow, even though it wasn't in the ideal age bracket that I had originally wanted. Loved the principal. The school is beautiful. Was really excited about it. My dad tells the story, and I have probably shared it before, either maybe on the podcast or with some of you in person, that that year I lived at home with them as I was transitioning and saving money. I came home that first day, and he said that the way that I looked, he never thought that I would make it through the school year. I came in, he could sense the weariness and the exhaustion from me. And I laid on the couch and I slept for hours, and it was hell. It was hell. I felt as though the job that had been sold to me was not the job that I inherited. So what was interesting about being at this middle school, like I shared, it was incredibly difficult, was that I had been given the story that folks wanted a choir teacher, and what I was met with was classes that did not want to be in choir, which if you have ever taught any class with folks that don't want to be in choir, much less middle school with folks that don't want to be in choir, much less kids that choir was very much so, well, I shouldn't say it like this, folks that my lens through which I viewed choir was very different from the lens with which they viewed choir. It was culture shock. And I was for the first time in a classroom where I was often in the minority as a white person. Majority of my students were students of color. And I was oftentimes in classrooms with students that Spanish was their first language, and a couple of times students didn't speak very good English, and they were still learning the language as well. And understanding that was, again, it was culture shock. And I had very little training of how to engage with that in my undergraduate experience. And I also was an undergrad in in 2005 to 2009. So the conversations that were being had around that were also very different, but it was also a very religious, predominantly white institution as well. Therefore, the lens with which you are learning that is very different in a Christian university that is oftentimes very, if you would say, guilty to the white savior mentality too. So a lot of things to unpack in that situation that I knew if I stuck with it would transform the teacher that I was, and it was incredibly difficult. And I have never learned more and grown more as a person than I did in that entire year. And very much so, who I am as a teacher is rooted in that experience. Now, I only stayed at that school for a year because again, I was given another opportunity to go and teach at an arts school in the area that was a charter school, and was asked to go, was almost recruited to go. And again, another very different experience in which was pitched to me was a little different in the reality of it. But again, I learned so much from that as well. But going back to the middle school I was at, there were times when I was so exhausted that I had to come up with better ways to even out the energy with which I was expending in every single class. Also was very aware of the fact that I was a white woman in one class in particular where there was a majority of Black young men that were in the class, and realizing that there was only a certain limit to which I could speak about, if you will. I'm not sure if about is the right way to say it, but just very much so realizing that we saw life through different lenses, and that's awesome. But I also wanted to provide opportunities for them to see people that looked like them engaging in musical experiences that were different than what they have ever been through before. And that's okay. Not trying to take away or diminish the musical experiences that they have had prior to, but also just exposing them to new experiences as well. And things that I began to bring into the classroom at that time were videos, but not like, let me turn on a video and let you play it. It was strategic videos that were short, that allowed me an opportunity to take a breather from being in front of or engaging actively in the facilitating of learning, because I firmly am a believer in the fact that I should not always be up in front of an ensemble, but provided an opportunity for me to have someone that wasn't a student teaching and leading the class, but also see how the students were learning too. So I really began to look online, and this was back, Teachers Pay Teachers was just kind of kicking off. And well, it had been around, but there wasn't a ton out there for secondary music educators. There were a couple of videos online. Stuart Chapman Hill used to have a really great one out there that also walked through what do you see when you look at a piece of music for the first time. And Robert Amchin at Louisville had really great videos of him teaching his collegiate students different folk songs and folk learning. And I loved those because it showed students that were college students that were also men, and sometimes men of color too, participating and singing together with others. And I realized that by strategically utilizing technology, and in particular videos, during a class experience did not negate the strength of my teaching, but instead enhanced it, because I was able to have a that other like side teacher again, kind of like I'd had in Valerie. I was able to have this co-teacher that I was able to see what they were presenting and how it might reflect a different understanding for students in how to learn and grow as musicians. I was also able to showcase folks that looked more like them as well. Now, let's be real, there's a huge disparity of music on the internet that is particularly in a choral setting that adequately displays students that look like diverse populations of people, from the color of their skin, which that being the most visual thing that we also see, because predominantly a lot of the choirs that we see on the internet are predominantly white. So also begin to see that as a big kind of gaping hole. But within all of that, again, found the power of utilizing video to teach students. At the same time, realizing there was a massive gap and not knowing how to close the gap between what I knew could be possible with music literacy instructions for students that had no background or understanding of what I considered, right, was a traditional choral setting or traditional rehearsal setting. Like, how could I teach my expectations to students who had never been in that type of setting before, and didn't necessarily buy into the fact too that you just did it just because. There needed to be a why factor. And I think that's the beautiful thing that so many students today really push for, is they're not going to do something just because you tell them to. They want to know the why behind it. And we too oftentimes, especially for me as a learner, have glossed over the why, right? We just did it because we were told to do it and just expected that the people telling us to do it were the people that knew. And that's a beautiful thing that we are seeing from students that are growing up in the era that we are in, because when they ask why, and also when we ask why now, we are forced to have an answer and to make sure that answer makes sense and is representative of people and histories and desires of where people are at and where they want to go. It's an incredibly powerful thing that we're seeing, but I didn't have a lot of answers then. Why is music not stapled when you hand them out an octavo? Why this? Why that? And I realized that there were so many things about being a musician that I took for granted because no one had ever taught them to me. And I began to notice that there were so many things about being a musician that we never explicitly teach, we just do. And oftentimes we don't ask the why, and that leaves massive gaps of opportunity for misunderstandings about certain things. And my mind began turning and realizing that there needed to be a better way, and that there needed to be a way in which we could take a singer with little to no choral music experience, or maybe it's experience from long ago that they've forgotten, and be able to take them from point A to point B quickly and efficiently in a way that makes sense. And I began to research and research and research. And about this time, people were sharing with me about Carol Kruger and the awesome work she was doing. And I was teaching private lessons, and I knew that she was a big proponent of Takadimi. And my student that I was teaching private lessons to, her teacher was teaching Takadimi, and she wasn't grasping it completely. And I was like, well, then Takadimi, blah, blah, blah. I was very anti-Takadimi. I didn't see how it made sense. And I learned to count, right? So if I learned to count, then it just makes sense. Long story short, I went and attended a summer session by Dr. Carol Kruger, and she opened my eyes within the first 5 minutes. It was like light bulbs that went on. And one thing that Carol will tell you, and if you have ever had the opportunity to sit through any of her sessions, you will learn too, is that, what she does is take on her own approach to things that she's learned over the years, hands down, no questions asked. But she also utilizes research by theorists and pedagogues that are well respected within the elementary music community, especially, and just elevates them to a middle or high school or secondary level of understanding for people like myself that think that there is a big difference between teaching secondary music and elementary music, when quite frankly, there isn't. And the way in which we sequence things is very similar, yet also very different. And she does, she basically preaches to the choir, us being her choir, about we need to get over ourselves. And she doesn't say it in that way, but that we need to be more intentional, essentially, about teaching thoughtfully many of the systems that folks that have come before us have set into place, because it works. For example, sound before sight, before theory, and that we can't expect people to learn a language if they don't know what it sounds like. And that's regardless of music, right? That's in any language, any spoken language as well. And that work of watching her teach us about how to teach and studying and beginning to implement that and try things on my own really began to shape the curriculum that I was building in my head. And I ended up leaving that middle school to go and teach at the art school, like I'd mentioned, where I had the opportunity to teach six courses at the high school level. I taught 4 ensembles, 1 fundamentals of music class, and 1 musical theater class. And I began to build out this curriculum that now makes up the Choir Baton teaching membership and continues to evolve as well. And that curriculum is rooted in breaking everything down to the why. So we're not just teaching kids that a quarter note equals a beat. It doesn't equal a beat. Sometimes it equals the beat, and here's why it sometimes equals the beat and why it sometimes doesn't equal the beat. I began teaching students that a time signature doesn't mean the top note tells you how many beats are in a measure, that the top number tells you that tells you how many beats are that the top number sometimes tells you how many beats are in a measure, and here's why. But sometimes it doesn't, and here's why. And I had the opportunity at that school with 6 different courses to practice and try out and fail and succeed in teaching this curriculum that was rooted in building musicians that understood the why and began to also see opportunities with which they might not understand something. I was able to work with a vast amount of students in courses that were labeled based on several different things, whether it was voice part, experience level, or interest, and continue to refine and develop and see what of the building blocks of this do people struggle to understand. And this is where I saw that even in a high school setting, students were really struggling to understand fractions. And it's imperative that you understand fractions in music because of how many parts there are in music making that you are consistently doing mental math as a musician. This then afforded me the chance to experiment with different levels, different types, and quite frankly, even different styles of music as well. In my Fundamentals of Music course, we weren't only talking about choral music, we were talking about all different types of music and studying music across time periods as well as genres. In musical theater, we were focused on musical theater music, and then in the other 4 ensembles that were all divided. Some were SATB ensembles, others were SA and or TB ensembles. That was another amazing experience to be able to really break down where inconsistencies in understanding were occurring and to test what worked as well. Now, I ended up leaving from that school as well. There were several concerns that I had as well, in addition to the fact that my dream job essentially opened up. The high school that most aligned with the program I had grown up in, and the high school that was literally a mile from the townhouse that I own, that position opened up. And it was meant to be in many respects for me to go there and to start at that school. That school was a really important part of this journey as well, because at this point I really knew the foundation with which I wanted to approach this set of how to teach choir. But now I had new students in the beginning of the year. I started with them in January, and these students had been through a rough semester. If they had been in the program for more than just that year, they had previously had the director who had been there for almost 30 years. He's amazing. He's a legend in the area. He retired, and the teacher that took over for him was no longer able to continue for some less than desirable reasons. And they had had a substitute that they loved, and then I came in, and it was just very interesting to walk into this position. And what was fascinating was how quickly the students picked up on this, because I had had the opportunity to practice a lot of the kinks, quite frankly, at a previous school. And I talk about this quite often. I used to think what was my biggest weakness and most undesirable trait, as I air quoted that as a teacher, was that I had not been at one school and built this legacy of a program for 10 years, 20 years at one school. I was really self-conscious about that. Now I can look back and realize that the opportunity by teaching at various schools, the opportunity that afforded me was to practice and iterate and nail down this methodology that the Choir Baton teaching membership is founded on. As a result, this is what it's all about, and it stems from that passion of mine at that first middle school I started teaching at after grad school, where I didn't know how to take singers that had no choral music experience along the journey, simultaneously, side by side, singers that had had years of private instrument lessons, been in choirs before, were in choirs outside of school music too. Also, at the last school I was at, I probably had some of the most musically gifted and talented students. By this point, I had at Longleaf had several students that had perfect pitch, and I still had that at Sanderson as well, which is just crazy, but really keeps you on your toes. And by working at a school with students that, not to say that the Longleaf students were not talented, they totally were. It was just different in the disbursement of this, and many reasons and facets neither one being better or worse than the other, but at Sanderson, there was a different type of student there as well. And I was able to really hone in on how to move students from point A to point F quicker, even if point A meant totally different things for each student. So I've talked a little bit about the journey. It's funny, I was maniacal about asking students, like, what doesn't make sense? Tell me what doesn't make sense. I would speak into existence this to them, that this was a passion of mine. And one day I was going to have a system for folks to be able to teach and learn how to read music, but not just like how to read music, but how to comprehend and understand and make it all happen. And so I demanded them ask me questions and try and fail. And it was amazing. I have so much of all of my students to thank for this journey. But within that, I want to tell you a little bit how it is broken down. And I want to tell you that it's different. To my knowledge, there is nothing else out there on the market like this. And it's really designed, the Choir Baton teaching membership is really designed for me to be your co-teacher, for us to work together in tandem to bring your students, again, from that point A to point F, no matter what point A means for each of them, because it probably means something different. The teaching membership itself is currently constructed a little differently because of the response to COVID, and as so many teachers were faced with needing material that they could send out to students for them to be able to work on their own. And I know, as someone that has worked on building content like this for years, that it is incredibly time consuming. And that is one thing that we now offer is videos, and we've always had worksheets, but now videos as well, that you can send to your students that walk them through certain things, because you might not be able to see them every single day and revise something or reteach something that they didn't understand the first time, or maybe you're not seeing them at all. And the fact that you can embed these videos in your PowerPoints or on your school sites and things like that in order to teach students and to have an avenue for them to rewatch things is incredibly important. I actually wanted to first build the teaching membership in this way when I was planning it out, but I thought, oh, it's really hard for teachers to co-teach, and then especially with someone that they don't necessarily know, and especially in and of this sense. So the teaching membership first started out as videos of me explaining how and why I went through this process and said and did the things that I do. And there's still some of that in the teaching membership, but for right now we've pivoted a lot so that the materials are student facing and not teacher facing as much. And we'll go back and fill in some of those gaps there. But that is how we have totally pivoted to really showcase how we want to help teachers right now. And again, I keep using the phrase co-teach, but it's so true. So the Choir Baton teaching membership is designed into modules. And if you're listening to this, these are thoughts and ideas that you can implement in your class, whether or not you are a teaching membership member or not. But every type of thing is divided into a module, and these modules I call like levels. And levels 1 and 2 are broken into 3 parts: rhythm, melody, and harmony. And then when you get into level 3, it encompasses all of those within the actual unit. It's not quite so divided. So while those first 2 levels, you might just think, oh, there's 2 levels. It's actually more kind of like 6 levels, but I grouped them together so that you could see the process is not thinking about every facet of like rhythm, and then from rhythm you go straight to melody, and it's that rhythm, melody, harmony is all happening within one level at a time, and you're always listening, assessing, and teaching to every single one of those components, and then being particular about when we add in something else. So here is the beauty of this. In level 1, in rhythm, it is designed to break down beat division, and beat groupings. And we talk about meter, we talk about simple, compound, mixed, duple, triple, quadruple, and building those words into students' vernacular because it helps them conceptualize what they are hearing and seeing and feeling in music when they're singing it, when they are hearing it on the radio, etc. I used to always kind of scoff in my early years of teaching at the fact that, of course they can figure out the beat, da 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 da. But quite the opposite. We all know the beat is the hardest thing for a person to be able to hear and determine and work out and such. And so I realized that part of the reason why my students were struggling is this lack of understanding of what the beat was and how it is felt and what a beat division means. And in the very beginning, as we're talking about beat divisions, what does it mean to divide one part into two and another part into threes? And can you feel that in the music? Simultaneously, beats are grouped together in music and organized, and they help us feel the stress and the pulse of the music. Just like when we are speaking and there's certain cadences and how we speak, there are certain cadences in the rhythm that we are singing because we are stressing certain words and not the other, or at least we should as we're developing phrasing. So oftentimes you talk about phrasing with students and they struggle to understand conceptually what that means. And I know I've said that before. I just need you to sing this musically or use this phrase. Well, by teaching them beat and beat groupings, that is giving them anchors with which to begin to understand how that phrase is fully being built. And quite honestly, how so much music is based upon the same types of stresses, but we don't always see it or teach it that way. Once you move on from teaching that and having students do two things that I believe are incredibly integral, having them echo what you're singing and also having them chain, then you move on to melody. And I'm very intentional in starting with do, re, mi, and do, ti, and la. And I introduce it just like that and both on the same day. And already can even talk about stepwise motion. It's really important for me to have students understand that connection between do and la, as well as the fact students are often scared of big leaps and skips and such in music. If I can get them to understand that they're not as scary as they are, they have already learned a 5-tone type of scale from la to mi, but I've broken it down in another way. Simultaneously, students oftentimes have trouble understanding what comes before do and the fact that it's a cyclical naming system for the pitches. So I'm dispelling that immediately from the beginning and by teaching them how it can work forwards and backwards. And finally, I learned that students too often were struggling to remember do to do, that entire phrase. So I began to segment do to do this way to ensure that they better understood that once they got past like fa and so, that they were more ingrained in understanding what the new syllables were after that farther along than if I had just started with do, re, and mi there. So then once students begin to understand those basic rhythmic components, then we're moving on and having them do do to mi and do, re, mi and la, ti, and do. Then we move on to harmony because so oftentimes, particularly older singers, feel that the other stuff is too elementary, and it's not, but I've found that by starting off by building harmony, do, so, do, mi, fa, mi, so, 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 do, ti, do, and la, mi, la, do, re, do, mi, 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 la, si, la, that is not only building a harmonic understanding of chord progressions for them, it's teaching them a new syllable without them realizing it in so for major and si in minor that will then benefit them farther down the line. And there's a lot of really cool things that you begin can begin to have them do, in which they're singing in harmony, which is what they think that, oh, choral music is all about singing in harmony, right? Versus just unison singing. And you have accomplished that all in the very beginning. And you then can take elements from rhythm and from melody and build in over top of that by having them sing, for example, do, 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 so, 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 do, 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 do. So there I can talk about, well, I did the same pitch in groups of 4. And so that would be quadruple. Then you can ask, well, is it simple or compound? And they could argue, because I would say I'm only going to sing the beat here. They could argue, well, we don't know, because it could be beat division, or it could of 2, or it could be to beat division of 3. And that is a really great way for you to begin to have them converse in these concepts versus putting music in their hands and just having them read something back. Once you're done with that level 1, there's a whole reading and writing and listening component to it. There are assessment videos that you can have them use. There are practice videos as well, in addition to instructional videos to show students about all the concepts we just talked about. Then you're going to move on to level 2. And before I get to level 2, I want to share, sometimes you'll hear pedagogues talk about not labeling certain pitches and just having them recognize the pitch relationship. So instead of going do, 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 so, so, changing that to a neutral syllable, lu, 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 lu. I tried doing it that way, of doing a neutral syllable then to a named syllable. And what I found is that my students struggled more, and that added on an extra layer that, quite frankly, I didn't have time for. But the more that they utilized the solfege and they used the hand signals when they were singing that to help them get into a bodily awareness of pitch relationship, then I could do a bit of a neutral syllable and they would be able to hear it, versus if I started neutral and then changed it to named. So that is something that I have found works best for me when I'm working with singers, that they pick up on that and do better with that as well. It keeps the labeling a bit more consistent as well. And that is something different that I do that other people might not. So if you find yourself and your students struggling with that back and forth labeling, that is what works for me. Moving into level 2, then we begin to break down what standard notation looks like and do a lot of work with fractions. Like I said, fractions are the bane of our existence as musicians if we are not able to fully understand them. There is a lot of adding fractions that have unlike denominators when we are just identifying simple dotted notes and rests, when we are comparing time signatures to note values and note names. And it's so important for us to spend time reviewing that. I also think it's a great way for us to show some solidarity to our math colleagues and to tell them that, hey, when we say music is math, this is exactly what we're doing. This is what we're talking about. I know that we all teach in different types of settings and with different students. But if you have never done any type of fractional assessment with your singers before you begin teaching them about music notation, I have a feeling that you will be shocked as to what you thought they might understand about fractions versus what they actually might understand about fractions in reality, and see parallels as to why some of them might struggle with rhythm. So we do a lot about fractions and a lot about note names in regards to 1/4 or a quarter and the different names attached to that. We add on we add on so, and practice the major triad and the minor triad of the one major, one minor. So before, where we did do, re, mi, now it's do, mi, so. And before, where we did la, ti, do, now it's la, do, and mi. So again, we have extended the connection between do and la. We have reinforced the so that they learned in harmony in the very beginning of level 1 harmony. They already knew so, but before that was low so. Now we're working high so. So we're establishing that connection of cyclicality of pitches as they move through the octaves. And it's a really great way for you to also begin to introduce skips, do to mi or mi to so, as well as leaps, do to so or la to mi, etc. Building that awareness. Then we also add in the 4 chord. So do, fa, so, do, mi, fa, mi, so, la, so, do, ti, do in the major, and in the minor, I like had my brain escaping for saying it. La, re, mi, la, and then do, do, re, do, mi, fa, mi, so, la, si, no. So, la, si. You know what I mean. It's totally escaping me as I'm looking at the camera here and the mic and recording and don't have it written out because I normally just speak about it. But we practice that same sort of chord progression. We are still echoing. We are chaining. We are building fun, different types of musical songs, right? Sometimes we might pick random small groups and do collaborations where everyone has the same chord progression, but they get to determine, is one person going to be on beat? Is one person going to be on beat division, on beat subdivision, or maybe connected beat? That's another thing I've failed to share. I talk about the concept of connected beat. Sometimes you'll hear the phrase elongated beat. That was originally how I learned it, but I found for me when I was teaching it, elongated beat didn't make sense because it lends itself to the mindset that we are actually changing the length of time of the beat, where the beat stays consistent. We're just connecting different parts of the beat to one another. So I say connected beat versus elongated beat. And from that point, when we've learned the 1-4-5-1, we are also really set up to then sing in level 3 the entire major scale and the entire natural minor scale as well. And technically, because we've been doing the 5-7 chord, we can also sing the harmonic minor scale in this next section as well. So that's a brief insight into level 2. Level 3 then goes into teaching about time signatures. And I grew up thinking that the top number tells you how many beats are in a measure and the bottom number tells you what note it is. And quite frankly, if you have gone through level 1, you'll get to this point and you'll realize that as Mari has said, the results are in, and we have determined that that is a lie. That's not actually the case. In fact, when we are learning about time signatures, we learn that the top number sometimes tells us how many beats are in a measure, but it can also tell us how many beat divisions are in a measure. And it depends on the type of meter in regards to what the function of the top note of a time signature is. And it also then depends on the bottom number to tell us if that is the type of note that gets the beat or if it's the type of note that gets the beat division. And the easiest way to do that is if you are teaching simple meter, a time signature in simple meter is going to have a top number of 2, 3, or 4, and simple meter time signatures are going to tell you how many beats are in a measure and what type of note gets that beat, meaning the bottom number of the time signature, right? So in 2-2, there are 2 notes. There are 2 beats per measure, and the half note gets the beat. So there's 2 half notes worth of time within each measure. Differently would be when you are in compound meter. In compound meter, you can identify if a time signature is in compound meter by if the top number is greater than 4, and it's always going to be in a multiple of 3, so 6, 9, or 12 most frequently. And when that top number is in 6, 9, or 12, then that is telling you how many beat divisions are per measure, and the bottom number is telling you what type of note gets the beat division. Now, when I was in graduate school, I had an amazing theory professor, and I would get this stuff wrong. because I'd never understood it like this. No one had explained it to me like this. And so, I was teaching it wrong. And I said, I don't understand why 3/8 is considered triple simple. And now I know why. And I love my theory professor then, but I don't remember a clear enough response that made me understand it like I have now understood it when I have learned to teach it this way. So 3/8 is in simple meter because when you are in 3/8, that means that the eighth note is getting the beat, and there are 3 beats per measure. Now, we sometimes might feel it in one, so it feels like a beat division of 3, but we can't have a type of meter that is one simple or one compound in this instance, right? All of our meters have to be in a duple, triple, or mixed, and it doesn't fit into that. So while it might be felt like it's in one, technically 3/8 is considered simple triple. Now, while we don't talk about mixed meters within level 3 here, once we get to mixed meters, it will begin to make sense. And you can also begin to see how sometimes in other meters where you previously had like a 6/8 where it is felt like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it changes to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can explain to students how even though it is written in this one way, it's actually felt in this other type of meter. And if we were to write it in that other type of meter, this is what it would look like, but it's not. So like hemiola-esque, if you will. I can't remember the exact definition of hemiola, but I feel like that constitutes as a hemiola, even though it wouldn't go across the bar line. So note to self, look up if hemiolas only occurs when there's a shift in the metrical feel of a piece of music that goes over bar lines, or if a hemiola can occur. It surely can only occur within a measure. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation I've had with myself about the accuracy of what, or exactness as to what a hemiola truly represents. Let's all find out and figure it out together. All of that said, from pulling time signatures and then practicing within the context of everything that we've previously done in levels 1 and levels 2, then we continue to move on, and in a couple lessons we will talk about all of the different scales. We'll also begin to introduce pitch. There is no reason why a singer needs to know, in my very professional opinion, quite frankly, there's no reason why a singer needs to know about the musical alphabet, particularly if you're singing in, well, I guess even if you're singing in fixed do, but particularly in movable do at the very beginning of their experience, because then you're adding on another layer where, quite frankly, they normally haven't mastered all of solfege yet. And if they are struggling to understand solfege, then you also add on letter names. That just is another layer that is very confusing to them, and there's just no need yet. Instead, we wait a little bit later till they understand the function and relationship, a bit more of solfege, and then say, this is where pitch comes into play and the 12 pitches. And we draw pianos and we draw them vertically so that they align with what a grand staff would look like and show the connections there, and whole steps and half steps in relationship to the solfege syllables as well. And once students are able to understand the musical alphabet beyond solfege, then the next level is to begin to talk about sharps, flats, and not time signatures, but key signatures on top of that. And when they learn key signatures, they are also not just learning major key, they're learning minor key simultaneously as well. That is a big, big breakdown of the Choir Baton teaching membership. And one of the things I'm so proud about it is that it makes logical sense for what a singer needs to know when they need to know it. I didn't even add in the unit where we begin to also talk about dynamics within that and layering things on. But to my knowledge, even by bringing in something like Sight Reading Factory or bringing in something like Music First, it throws kids to a piece of music that they're having to read, and they are struggling to keep up with the beat. And this explains not just the how, but it tells them the why. And you'll remember I talk about the fact that singers today, more than ever, they want to know the why. Don't just tell me what to do, tell me why to do it. And that's why I'm such a firm believer in the Choir Baton teaching membership. I want to be your co-teacher. If you use Sight Reading Factory, or if you use Smart Music, or any of the other awesome things that are out there, those are just some of the big ones I know off the top of my head. This is an opportunity for you to supplement that, but also provide a teacher that's by your side explaining to students the how and why. I also encourage members, if something doesn't make sense or you need them to pick something apart, I can also be your scapegoat, right? Like, what did you think of that crazy lady and how she explained it? Or, oh, she just doesn't know what, you can use me as your partner in crime there to really get them to dig deep and try to figure out what holes do they have and how can you cover these holes. I'm a huge believer in this, because at every school that I had been at, I'd seen a gap in the students that I had. There were students with a ton of musical experience, and there were students with zero formal musical experience. And I should say a ton of formal musical experience in that first example. And what I have found is that the Choir Baton teaching membership is that thing that bridges that gap, because I intentionally come at it not just at a way that is going to make sense, but approaches it at a different way to where even experienced singers are probably not very familiar with simple and compound meters and breaking it down and thinking of it in regards to duple, triple, or quadruple and what that means. Even experienced singers are probably not used to singing harmonic progressions or thinking of beat in a broader sense. And this is an opportunity to really kind of level the field. The hard thing is, for you as a teacher, to my knowledge, people aren't totally teaching this way. And by golly, I'm not saying this is like the only way by any means, but this does require you to think a little bit outside of the box and to trust me in my experience as to how and why this is laid out, and also some trial and error on your part to figure out what fits best for you. And knowing that you have got to customize it to your teaching style and to your students as well. But that's the beautiful thing about this, is that it is incredibly customizable, because while it might be my face on some of the videos, you can call me your co-teacher. I am here with you. And also there are other videos that my face isn't a part of them as well, and some of the practices and assessments as well. So you can deliver the content in person if you want, or however you choose to, and then still use the other materials as well. You don't have to do this alone. And I always say this is, my dream was to build the thing that I needed when I first went to that middle school program, and I did not know where to begin, and I didn't know where to turn, and no one was there on the internet to help me in the way that I needed to be helped yet. And at that moment, I think I knew my calling was to do this, but I didn't know how or why, and I was terrified, so scared, didn't quite frankly want to do it because I knew it would be hard. I knew it wouldn't be easy. That's kind of the same thing. But like, this is something that lights my soul on fire, because I firmly believe that through teaching people to read music, I use the word read broadly, but by teaching them to read music enables them to understand the music they're listening to on the radio more, to attend our concerts and understand what's happening within those more, and so many other facets. It only further validates the work that we do as teachers, particularly within the classroom, where so oftentimes we don't feel validated, or we don't feel as though other people validate the work that we're doing. This is designed to give you strength and to give you someone by your side. So in closing, that is a little bit about my journey, my passion, the premise behind the teaching membership. If you have not heard of it before, there is nothing else kind of like it out there yet, although I know other people are building all sorts of things, and now there's so many other great resources for music that for you to bring into your classroom that I'm by no means not saying don't go and check those out. They're really great, but everyone is looking for something that works for them. And if you are looking for something that is already pre-curated for you, that is a one-time yearly cost, bi-yearly cost, or is a month-to-month cost that you can cancel at any time. Try it out, and if it doesn't work for you, you can cancel. And then if you want to rejoin the next time the teaching membership opens, that is awesome too. I'd love to have you. I've realized that we are all on different budgets, and I try to price it that in the perfect place that it is something that is a commitment to, but is also not something that you couldn't give up a bottle of wine for a month to be able to do, because I know what it is like to be a teacher and to quite frankly, at one point I couldn't afford a bed, and I was waiting till my friend's bed that I was borrowing to come in, and so I was sleeping on the floor, or I was making it by on $30 a week for everything, food, toiletries, gas, all the things, and eating like this pizza crust from Kroger and like making it stretch. Or I knew that if I was going to go get a bottle of wine, it was going to be on a Tuesday, because that's when the teachers got the 10% discount, and so I could get my $3 bottle of wine for 10% off of the $3. Like, I have been there, and by no means like where I want to be yet financially, but I do try to be as cognizant as possible in the pricing of that, so that it fits anyone that is in need. It fits that budget, because I guarantee you're going to be getting so much more than you probably even know what to do with at first, but it's all a process and starting slowly. And the biggest thing is just starting. So again, that way you know that you're not alone. I am so grateful that you have listened this much into the Choir Baton podcast, that you are a part of our community, that you are passionate about more people singing like I am and so many others are. And if you're not interested in the Choir Baton teaching membership, it's fine too. But I hope that you have been able to take something from my journey of all the different schools, and a reminder that no matter where you're at, you can always learn something from that, and it will serve you in your future career. And simultaneously, in a place that you can take some of the sequencing that I have done and laid out for you in this lesson, and consider how and why you are approaching teaching your singers the way you are as well. The Choir Baton teaching membership is open only for a limited time, and so you want to make sure that you are signed up and on the wait list. There will be a link in the show notes to this podcast for you to be able to go and sign up, so that when the doors open, it will be for a limited time, 1st of January, that you are on that list. And if you are listening to this later on into 2021, I do open up the membership from time to time. So make sure that you sign up for the teaching membership whenever you're listening to this, to be on the waiting list to find out more information about that as well. My name is Beth, and again, thank you for listening to the Choir Baton podcast, and special thanks to our editor, producer extraordinaire, former student of mine, someone that has gone through much of this process as I've outlined for you as well, Miss Maggie Hemedinger. Special thanks to her, and make sure you are checking us out on all the social media channels, but not gonna lie, Instagram's our fave.